Hi, this is a conversation with Professor Preston Jones from John Brown University. Professor Jones, I recently was watching a movie about the Middle Ages, and when one thinks about teachers, one thinks about this guy on a podium and then well-behaved students in the bottom. Mm-hmm. And then there's reality.
Yeah, and then there's reality. Of course, when I began teaching in, I guess 1997, it was perfectly okay to walk into a classroom with a textbook and a piece of chalk. Of course, we don't use chalk anymore either, not much anyway. And I would just lecture and have no pictures or anything. Of course, things have changed, so that doesn't work anymore anyway, just sort of the professional in front of the students. And then, human nature being what it is, students might know that what they're doing is very important, that it's important to be in school, it's important to learn. But then there's the reality that young people don't always make the best decisions. And so, so here's the teacher who has put a few hours into preparing for class, who has something really important he wants to convey to the students. And then he looks out at the class and 3 are asleep and 2 are secretly texting under their desks. And it's challenging, and that's one of the many challenges that comes with being a teacher. If you're a serious one, or a professor, I'm a professor, but usually when people ask me what I do, I just say I'm a teacher, because that's really how I think of myself. And I think if you're serious about teaching, if you're really serious about teaching, if you really want the best for students, you really want students to learn, you want to try to make a mark on students. You can't reach them all, but if you want to make a mark on as many students as possible, it's difficult. There are a lot of difficulties, and some of the difficulties take place in the classroom because you've got a lot of different personalities you're dealing with. You have, the students have their own pressures that they bring to the classroom with them. They have their own concerns that they bring to the class. So sometimes just even connecting in a classroom can be difficult. But then there are many other challenges, many other stresses on a professor's time. And so that's what I'm here at La Universidad Francisco Marroquín. I'm going to meet today with a group of professors. We'll just address this question: what are teachers for? What are some of the challenges? I don't know about Guatemala, but I know that in the U.S., 50% of those who go into teaching, not at the university level, but at the high school level, about 50% of those who go into teaching are no longer teaching in 5 years. So apparently the stresses are too much, or teachers didn't know what they were getting into, or something's happening. So I want to talk about, we'll meet and discuss this question: what are teachers for? And we'll talk about our commitments and our ideals and our hopes, and then the realities that we face. So, yeah.
When teaching, is there anything like a favorite challenge for you?
The most consistent thing I want to do, which can be a challenge, is help students to see that whatever I'm talking about matters to them. And so, for example, if I'm giving a lecture on ancient Mesopotamia, I think a student can quite reasonably say, what do people who lived 6,000 years ago in present Iraq, what does that have to do with me? And what I want to do is try to help them see it does have something to do with you. Because when we study the ancient Mesopotamians, for example, we can learn something about us, because those people, after all, had a very different culture, a very different language, but they were human beings as we are. And they faced certain kinds of challenges, and we can study how they faced those challenges. And then we can learn from that, and we can apply what we've learned to our own lives. We can study the laws of Hammurabi, for example, and see how laws from a very ancient society are in some ways quite different. The punishments might be quite different. The approach to law might be quite different. Yet there's this idea of justice and fairness that's built into this ancient law, And we still have this idea today. And so that would be an interesting conversation. Is there something within human beings that makes us, even human beings from very, very different cultures, very, very different societies, very, very different periods in time, but yet there's this common human desire for justice and fairness, and we could talk about that sort of thing. Or just as another example, in one class, which is not a language class, it's a history class, but I devote 1 or 2 classes to learning, say, about 50 Greek words from classical Greek. And students might ask, well, what's the point of this, right? And the point is that there are hundreds of words in English and also in Spanish that come from Greek. And so if we learn a little bit of Greek, then we're learning a little bit about these sounds we're constantly making. Where do these sounds come from? So that's the most consistent challenge, meaning that it's the one thing that I really want to try to accomplish most consistently, helping students to see that whatever we're talking about does matter. It's relevant to them.
Does something frustrate you when teaching?
Yeah, indifference. I teach at a private university, which is expensive. And I tell students, do you understand that there are millions of people around the world who would give so much to be sitting where you're sitting? I mean, this is a truly extraordinary opportunity that you have, given the history of the world, and given, the reality today, that this is an incredible privilege. Of course, the same is true of the students here at Francisco Marroquin. This is an incredible privilege. And, when students organize their lives in such a way that, they're not able to benefit really from the experience, because they're making bad decisions, they live with, sleep deprivation and things like that. You understand that they're young and people learn as they grow. But indifference. But then I also have to say, sometimes within the educational system itself, there's a sense of indifference. There's the idea that, so long as students are taking tests, so long as students are taking exams, so long as students are taking their classes and getting their degrees, then we're doing our jobs. But I'm not sure that there's always a real concern about the people. I like the old-fashioned idea of what a professor is. A professor is someone who has something to profess, right? Which doesn't mean that I want to turn my classes into, ideological platforms, right? That's not the idea. But I want to convey an approach to life that is thoughtful, that's interested in useful, important things that have, ideas that have stood the test of time. You and I were speaking a few minutes ago before the cameras came on about Aristotle, right? I mean, this man's work has stood the test of time. One generation after another has said this man, at least in some respects, his ethics, for example, was particularly thoughtful, and this is worth the time. And I worry when, even among professors, I hear people say, well, that's too hard for the students. Let's give them something easier. Let's not, because we have to worry about whether they like us or not, because we have to keep the customers happy. That's a kind of indifference to the educational enterprise. And I often feel very discouraged by that. Indifference among 20-year-olds, I understand. Indifference among 45-year-olds who have really given up on education. They continue to teach, they continue to do the routine, but you don't get the feeling they're committed heart and soul to the cause. That discourages me. That's a challenge. But that's one of the things I want to fight against.
2 questions in one.
Yeah.
Which was your best learning experience, and do you have, which were your best teachers?
Oh, well, easy, Mr. Charles Grandy. Mr. Charles Grandy. I went to a very bad high school, and I didn't have a lot of encouragement when I was young. And the high school I went to mostly was a monumental, colossal waste of time. But there was this one teacher called Charles Grandy, and we called him Grandy in Spanish, is Grande. So Charles the Great is how I think of him. And he was, everything I just said comes from him, because he was very smart, he was very cerebral, but when he taught from the soul. And you could tell that he cared. And that woke me up, because I realized, this man really, he doesn't know me, he can't be my friend. He has, 200 students, he can't be my personal friend. but he cares about me. He cares about the state of my mind, and he wants me to wake up. And he did wake me up. And it took me a long time, for that awakening to, really turn into something. He saved my life. Had it not been for Charles Grandy, for Charles the Great, I don't know where my life would have gone. But, when I feel discouraged, I ask, what would Mr. Grandy do? And what Mr. Grandy did every day is he got up and he went to battle in certainly one of the most important fights a human being can fight, and that is for the cause of education, trying to wake young people up. And I know he did it for others, he did it for me. And so I don't look forward to a world without Mr. Grandy. But to the extent I can, I want to continue his mission. So that's easy. Yeah, I've had other good teachers, but he, no question, was the one to whom really in some basic way I owe my life.
And
Yeah.
favorite personal, wonderful experience in learning?
Well, it'd be Mr. Charles Grandy again. What comes immediately to mind is I took a class. It was the Bible as Literature class, and we were discussing the book of Job, and it wasn't a theology class. It wasn't a religion class, really. It was studying the Bible as literature. And I won't try to describe what he did, but what he did is he began to sort of act out a scene in the Bible. Was really, as we say in English, we have this expression, over the top. I mean, you wouldn't think that a teacher would do something. Well, I'll just basically say he stood up on a desk and he towered over us in the class, and he was, yelling out things that, the book of Job in the Old Testament says that, God said to Job, right? But you could just tell that Mr. Grandy was so, as we say in English, so into what he was doing. He was so passionate about it, and he wanted so much for his students to get what this piece of literature was about, that he was willing to take a risk. He was willing to seem foolish. He was willing to become the butt of jokes. And that's what some students did. They thought, this guy is crazy or something like that. But as he did it, I just thought, wow, here he goes again, just really trying to drive it home to us that this piece of literature is important, it matters, and if we take it seriously, we'll be better people, because we will have thought more about something, we will have deepened ourselves in some way. So that's just an experience that comes to mind. There are others, but that's the one that most comes to mind.
Finally, Professor Preston, what should a student expect from a teacher/professor?
The students need to trust teachers. I tell my students, I need to trust you, right? If you want to succeed in life, then you need to be a trustworthy person. If you say you're going to be somewhere, you've got to be there, all right? If there are problems, we understand there are problems, but under normal circumstances, people need to know that you're trustworthy. At the same time, you need to trust me. You need to know that when I walk into class, I'm ready. You need to know that when I walk into class, I'm prepared. You need to know that I'm not going to waste your time. If I can do something in 5 minutes, I'll do it in 5 minutes. I'm not going to come up with a gimmick to take 20 minutes just to pass class time, right? That I'm going to take preparation seriously. I'm going to take their own interests. I tell my students, you need to trust that I will take your own interests seriously. And it's not in your interest to get away with not being a responsible person. It's in your interest for me to help you to become a responsible person. So I think that ideally, students should be able to trust that their teachers are serious about what they're doing, are committed to what they're doing, are well prepared. They're not just doing the same thing over and over again. Or if they do the same thing, you teach one class after another, so you might do the same thing repeatedly, but that you try to think about it in a new way. You try to make things relevant. Obviously, this is easier with literature, with poetry, with history. It might be more difficult teaching engineering, but still, engineering professors are people, and they can convey that human element. But I shouldn't say very much about that because I don't know what it's like to teach engineering. But of course, engineering students should expect that their professors, their teachers, are really going to do what they can do to provide the best possible service that they can for the good of, it's in the teacher's interest to do that, it's in the student's interest to do that, it's in society's interest for students and teachers to do their jobs and to do them well.
Professor Jones, thank you very much for sharing these ideas and experiences with us, and thank you to